This video is brought to you by my supporters on Patreon. Hey guys, I'm here with the second KDA Akali video, and in this video I'm making her smaller weapon, the Dagger. I'm not exactly sure if that's the correct name for it, but I'm just going to call it a dagger this whole video. Anyways, what I'm doing here is cutting out all of the pieces for this on 4mm EVA foam. This is high density EVA foam that I got from Cosplay crafts. The patterns for both of the KDA Akali weapons are available on my store, Envy, and Etsy. I should note that while I did pattern out the heart piece to be made out of foam, I actually didn't make that part of this prop out of foam. Instead, I had a cosplayer called Ravenstar Cosplay 3D print the piece for me. But you'll see that later. For now, after I've finished up tracing all of the pattern pieces out, I go ahead and cut them out using a box cutter or exacto knife, but scissors work as well. And then I start dremeling the pieces or sanding the pieces to make them smooth on the edges, but also adding a bevel to wherever a piece needs to attach at an angle. To glue the pieces together, I used contact cement. And the way contact cement works is however it says it does on the instructions on the bottle. I recommend you always follow the instructions on the bottle because I believe different brands work differently. And right there, I was piecing together the blade, like the actual blade part of this dagger, and then here I'm working on some of the handle pieces. Basically, throughout this entire build, I just work on sections, and then I piece all of those sections together at the very end. So to create this crosshatch pattern that she has in the handle of the dagger, I take my pattern from earlier and trace out the lines in Sharpie, and then I score those lines using an exacto knife. So what scoring is you take your knife and you cut not all the way through the foam, just like halfway through or a quarter way through, just make sure you don't cut all the way through, and then you hit it with a heat gun and those lines will expand and open. And you'll have a nice clean groove or etching in your foam. While I'm heating it, or while this foam is heated, I also go ahead and bend it to shape the handle a little bit better so that it's slightly more rounded. And here I'm just creating more bevels where the two pieces are going to have to connect at an angle. And I do that by taking some scissors and cutting off a majority of the foam at that edge, and then a Dremel and sanding that and smoothing it down. And then going back to using contact cement to glue the rest of the pieces together. I'm using 2mm EVA foam to create this odd detail that she has right in the middle of her blade. It sits at the bottom of the actual blade part and then the top of the handle right there in the center, smushed in between all of the layers. I'm not really sure what shape to consider it, but you'll see where I place it later, and you can see it if you look at a reference photo, which I recommend you do when you're building your prop. Before attaching all of the pieces like one side to the other side, I go ahead and I take hot glue and I apply that along all of the seam lines. I do this just for extra added security. I feel like it made it a bit more sturdier, although contact cement is pretty strong all on its own. Make sure you're sanding any and all edges that won't be able to be reached once you glue pieces together before you glue it together, otherwise you're going to have a hard time trying to smooth out those edges later.
Broken. Don't ever forget you're golden. I will find the light in your soul. I'll be there. Never leaving you in the darkness, even when you're out of focus. I will be the light in your life. You'll see it clear. I'll be your inspiration, 'cause I know that you'll do just what you're told.
Once I have all of the pieces for the handle stuck together for both sides, I go ahead and attach those two sides together so now that they're like one whole handle. And obviously I've already done the same for the blade. This is the part where I place that odd middle section that this blade has that I was talking about earlier, where we made it out of the 2mm EVA foam. That's where it attaches, right there in the center. And then I attach the blade to the handle, and I do that by cutting out these little triangular shapes at either farthest edge of the blade so that it can kind of sit wrapped around the handle just a tiny bit, so it's a bit more secure and looks like one more solid piece and actually kind of flows into each other rather than sitting oddly on top of the handle. And I bevel those edges as well so that it sits correctly. I also use my Dremel to sand down that middle section of the blade at the very top that got a little bit wonky when I glued it together because I beveled it way too much and it sat at a lot more of an angle than I meant for it to. But it's an easy fix because foam can always be added to or taken away from by using more foam or by sanding it. Anyways, once that's done, I prime the dagger with wood glue. I did about 3 to 5 layers of wood glue, and I filled in any seams that were a bit rough or had gaps in them using Cosplay clay from Cosplay Crafts. Let that dry overnight, sand it down with a Dremel, and then continue to prime it. Once it's all primed, I go ahead and paint it. I realized that I could have painted the entire thing white, but I masked off the area that was going to be gold anyways before applying the white. Although if you're using a white paint primer, I recommend you just paint the whole thing white because then you got your primer out of the way as well. So I'm removing all of the masking tape or painter's tape and paper that I had used to mask it off, and then remasking it, covering the white section completely so that only the parts that were going to be gold were showing. Like I said earlier, I had that heart piece 3D printed, and I attached that after I had painted both the dagger and the heart pieces gold separately. And so once the heart piece is done, because I did have to mold it and cast a second one for the other side, once that was done, I sanded all that down so it was nice and smooth, painted it with gold, and then sanded down the area that I was going to be attaching the heart to, and applied contact cement to both pieces and stuck it together. I also added a little bit of hot glue wherever I could reach, just for some added security. I made sure to do it in only places that wouldn't show though, because I didn't want you to see it from the sides or anything. Once that was done, I used black oil paint to shade the entire prop and then topped it off with a coat of clear glossy spray paint. And that finishes up this video. I hope you guys found this video helpful and enjoyed watching it. Thanks for watching. Have a lovely day, and bye.